Good day, afternoon, or night, and welcome to the day 5 of the Newcomers for Nuclear Summer School. Today, we explore the intersection of nuclear science and industry, where innovation meets application, from radiation protection to high activity sources and accelerators. We will uncover how nuclear technologies are driving progress in sectors as diverse as healthcare, manufacturing, and environmental monitoring. These topics remind us that nuclear science is not just about theory, it's about impact, and it's about solving real world problems with precision, safety, and responsibility. We invite you to engage fully, ask questions, and connect with our speakers and each other. So let's continue building a community that's informed, inclusive, and ready to lead. So this is the agenda for today, and we have two wonderful speakers, Dr. Margaret Chege and Dr. Valeria Staroboitova. She's joining us from Vienna. She's ex-former IEA Radiation Technological Officer, and Dr. Margaret Chege, she's a lecturer at Kenyatta University. And we are now counting on the support of two great moderators, Mrs. Purity Mawaya from Kenya and Jani Maupare from Ghana, who's currently doing her PhD in the USA. So my colleague Lancina will be introducing part of our panel. And please, Lancina, over to you. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Florencia. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, where you are. I'm Lancina too, one of the initiators of summer school. I would like to thank you for your dedication for the summer school. It is an important milestone for us to impact nuclear science, nuclear society in our continent, in our world. Thanks so much. I'm going to present you the first moderator. She is Mrs. Purity Mawa. I have honored to meet her last year in Nairobi. In Nairobi, it will be very, very wonderful for her to organize something together. Mr. Purity Mawa is a senior corporate communication officer at the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency in Kenya. With over 7 years of experience in nuclear communication and stakeholder engagement. She is an enthusiastic nuclear communicator who uses her voice and social platform to create awareness about nuclear technology. She holds a communication and public relations degree, and she's pursuing a master's degree in development communication at the University of Nairobi. Mrs. Mayua is a Chartered Public Relations professional and a member of the Public Relationship Society of Kenya and Women in Nuclear Kenya. Her expertise spans corporate communication, digital communication, and strategic stakeholder management, helping to build public understanding and trust around nuclear energy technology. In this step, I let Mrs. Purity Mawa to start. She's speak and to introduce the first speaker, Professor Margaret Chege. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning from wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much, Dr. Lancina, for the introductions. Thank you so much for the organizers for such an insightful session. If you've joined us since day one, you will agree with me that it has been a very enlightening session. So without further ado, I have the honor of introducing our first speaker for the day, who's Dr. Margaret, and she's going to take us through fostering open dialogue on radiation protection and nuclear safety, a key to gaining acceptance for nuclear power in Africa. Dr. Margaret holds a PhD and a master's degree in environmental and radiation physics. She's currently a lecturer in the Department of Physics at the Kenyatta University in Kenya, where she's actively involved in teaching and also research. Her research interest includes occupation radiation exposure, naturally occurring radiation material and random, and nuclear and radiation communication, and also peaceful application of nuclear energy. Dr. Chege also participates actively in international initiatives related to environmental, radiation, and nuclear physics. She also serves on the Health Physics Society Mentorship Committee and contributes to several international Radiation Protection Association tasks group, including NORM Task Group, Education and Training Task Group, Women Radiation Task Group, and Mentorship Task Group. At the national level, Dr. Chege plays a key role in establishing the Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Youth Network here in Kenya, a youth-led initiative that promotes radiation protection, nuclear safety, and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy through webinars, research, training, programs, and also partnership both locally and international organizations. You must agree with me that through her CV, she's going to deliver something very interesting for all of us, given the fact that radiation and conversation is one of the key concerns. So without further ado, I'd open the floor to you, Dr. Margaret, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much, Purity, for that introduction. It's a pleasure. Thank you all, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. And today, it's indeed an honor for me to take part in this summer school and to get the opportunity to present on a subject that is very important, but often misunderstood. And this is on nuclear power and the role of radiation protection and nuclear safety. Now, for the most part, when people hear about nuclear power, the conversation usually divides into two. There is that group that feels that nuclear power is the perfect solution for climate change, for industrialization. And there are those who feel that nuclear power is a no-go zone. They associate it with a risk, with exposure, with health impacts. But the truth of the matter is, nuclear energy falls between the two. And while it has very many benefits, it also comes with some responsibility that requires radiation protection and nuclear safety. And radiation protection and nuclear safety, actually, it is the basis, it is the foundation upon which nuclear power is built. Radiation protection and nuclear safety, being part of nuclear power, makes nuclear power more acceptable to people. And that said, today I will discuss this through, next slide, please. Florencia, next slide, please. I will discuss this through 4 points. One is why nuclear power matters for Africa. Then there's radiation protection and nuclear safety across the nuclear fuel cycle, aspects of open dialogue. And then we have the conclusion. Next slide, please. Now, why nuclear power? We know in Africa, especially, the population is rising. The cities, they're expanding. Industries are coming up. And all these require vast amounts of electricity. Additionally, Africa receives the brunt of climate change. Climate change that brings about drought, climate change that brings about unpredictable seasons, climate change that leads to insufficient food production. And when now you use fossil fuels, that will just make the situation worse. And renewables, for example, wind and solar, the energy is not sufficient. And that is where nuclear power comes in. Because nuclear power, it offers vast energy and low carbon emission. So it leaves a very small carbon footprint. Also, nuclear power is stable. It provides stable source of energy 24/7. It does not depend on seasons. It does not depend on whether it's cloudy or not, whether it's summer or winter. It's there 24/7. And also it offers a large base load, which is essential for industrialization. But all said, nuclear power is more than that. It is also a social contract. A social contract in that people need to feel that with nuclear power, their health is protected, the environment is protected, and the future is protected. So people need to trust that nuclear power will offer all this. Next slide, please. And that is where radiation protection comes in. Radiation protection and nuclear safety comes in. Radiation protection and nuclear safety is supposed to be applied in the entire nuclear fuel cycle for people to gain trust in nuclear power. But what do we mean when we say radiation protection? What do we mean when we say nuclear safety? And what do we mean by nuclear fuel cycle? Now, for the most part, when people talk about risk associated with nuclear power production, what comes to mind is the nuclear waste. What comes to mind is the radioactive waste. But what they seem not to know is that there's much more to radiation protection and nuclear safety than a nuclear waste, than radioactive waste. In fact, those two, the radioactive waste, the nuclear waste, and nuclear power generation, they are part of the nuclear power generation chain, which we are now referring to as nuclear fuel cycle. So what is this radiation protection? What is this nuclear safety? And what does the nuclear fuel cycle entail? Radiation protection, basically, the focus is on the people and the environment, and how the people and the environment can be shielded from exposure to harmful radiations, harmful amounts of ionizing radiation. That is radiation protection. And then on nuclear safety, the focus is on the facility itself. What do you do in the facility to prevent accidents from occurring? And what measures do you have in place to make sure there's containment of radiation in the event a nuclear accident occurs? Radiation protection focus is on the people and the environment. Radiation safety, the focus is on the nuclear facility. Then I've talked of the nuclear fuel cycle. Nuclear fuel cycle has 3 stages. The first stage is referred to as the front end. We have uranium mining. Recently, uranium was discovered in Tanzania. And probably Tanzania will set up a nuclear power plant. So they may use that uranium to generate fuel to run their nuclear power plant. Now the front end, uranium mining. Safety has to be taken into consideration. We have, once the uranium has, mining has occurred, the uranium, the milling has to occur, the conversion, the enrichment, and then you get the fuel that you require to run a nuclear power plant. Then there is the second phase is the power generation, and the focus is the reactor itself. Again, procedures to ensure safety and protections have to be in place. And then there is the back end. This is what people really talk about, but it is just part of the power production chain. So at the back end, we have spent fuel management, and then there's the radioactive waste. What you cannot use further, what do you do with it? And like I've said, in all these stages, protection, safety measures, they have to be employed. Next slide, please. So protective measures in the mining sector. What exactly do you do to ensure that the people working there are protected? There is dust suppression. Radiation has to be monitored. And the worker health programs have to be in place. Fuel fabrication, uranium is a radioactive element. And if it is ingested, then the radiation emitted within the human body can actually be quite harmful or inhaled. So measures have to be put in place to ensure that does not happen. Then also during reactor operations, there has to be that shielding to ensure that radiation emitted during the power production process does not get to the people working there, and the ALARA principle that is usually employed to ensure that people are protected, ALARA as low as reasonably possible. After that, there is the waste that is generated, including the radioactive waste and the nuclear waste. How is it stored? Because some of the waste generated can be very active and remain active for a very long time. So it has to be stored in such a way that it does not harm the people or the environment. And there has to be environmental monitoring, of course, to ensure that there is no contamination. Then the safety aspect. Now I've said that the nuclear safety aspect, I've said that the focus is the plant itself. What are the measures put in place? The redundant cooling systems to make sure that cooling, if cooling is required, then it is there. Strong containment. In case of an accident, there is containment of radiation. Evacuation plans, emergency plans, they have to be put in place. And then drills have to be carried in case there's an emergency. How exactly are you supposed to behave? Then, when all these are put in place, then they should be communicated to people, because putting systems in place is not sufficient for nuclear power to be accepted by the people. The measures, they must be seen, understood, and trusted. People need to know what you've done to make sure that they are protected. Tell them, let them understand, and they are going to trust. So this requires open dialogue. Dialogue is very important. Next slide, please.
As we shift to the next slide, I would like to draw your attention to the time so that we're able to take in questions, and then also encourage the participants to send in their questions through the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the aspects of open dialogue. We have transparency, building of a safety culture, learning from past incidents, public awareness and education, regulation and global cooperation, ethics and social responsibility. I'll go through all these one at a time. Next slide, please. Transparency. Why do people mistrust nuclear power? Technology itself, not really. It is the secrecy. People don't want to talk about nuclear power. Accidents. If it occurs, people don't want to explain what happened. For example, the Chernobyl accident, there was a lot of secrecy. Fukushima, information was shared and lessons were learned. The trust that was lost during Chernobyl was regained to some extent. So basically, transparency, it saves lives and builds trust. Silence endangers both, because like in Chernobyl, people are not informed what was happening, and evacuation was not done as fast as it should have been done. Next slide, please. Then we have building a safety culture. Openness does not just mean talking to the public. It also means talking to the people who are working in the industry. They should feel empowered to ask questions and raise concerns. The management should prioritize safety above everything else, and mistakes should be reported. They should not be covered up, because at the end of the day, open discussion on what is working or not is what improves safety. Next slide, please. Then learning from past incidents. As much as nuclear accidents are rare, they do happen. And when they happen, the consequences can be extremely serious. Fukushima, what worked, what failed was shared out, and people learned from it. In South Africa, there was that incident in 2007 where people raided a facility and a lesson was learned and safeguards were strengthened. So open dialogue, it ensures that mistakes are not repeated. Next slide, please. Then there's public awareness and education. You know, radiation is it's invisible. You can't see it. And therefore it's misunderstood. But radiation is everywhere. It's in soil, it's in water, it's even in bananas. So what really matters is not the radiation itself, being there or not being there. It's how you handle radiation protection and safety from harmful radiation exposure. The radiation protection and nuclear safety aspects. There should be open discussion, public education to demystify nuclear power, to gain people's trust, because trust leads to acceptance. So what matters is how do you handle radiation, not if radiation is there or not. Next slide, please. Then there is regulation and global cooperation. Radiation knows no borders. If there's an accident, if say in Kenya we have a nuclear power plant and there's an accident, there's a likelihood that the radiation will go, the radioactive elements will go to Uganda, will go to Tanzania. So radiation knows no borders, and therefore international dialogue and cooperation is required, and regulation should be put in place and continuously reviewed and openly discussed. They should not be kept in secret. Next slide, please. Then there is the ethical and social responsibility. Nuclear is not just technical, there's the ethical part. And people should feel that their future is protected, because the future of their children and their children's children, they are protected because they live with the nuclear waste generated. Also, a resistance. In Kenya, for example, there was that resistance at the cost of nuclear power because there were fears of displacement and waste management. So communication was not done. It appears it was not done well. So that the social responsibility part was not covered well. But in Siaya, there were consultations that were made and the project gained more acceptance there. So secrecy breeds opposition, openness builds cooperation. At the coastal region, there appears to have been information was not openly given. The social responsibility aspect was not well covered, but in Siaya, apparently it was, and that's probably why nuclear power was more accepted in Siaya. Next slide, please. It appears that the conclusion slide, I don't know what has happened, but actually, in conclusion, radiation protection and nuclear safety are the backbone of nuclear power. They have to be present for nuclear power to be accepted. And the only way people can accept nuclear power is by openly discussing the presence of these radiation protection and nuclear safety measures. Openly discuss them because openness builds public confidence. It strengthens safety culture, ensures lessons are shared and not hidden, improves awareness and preparedness. It builds trust. Trust leads to acceptance. Acceptance leads to nuclear power plants that can lead to reduced climate change and bring up the economic status of countries. So whether nuclear power becomes a tool of fear or a pillar of prosperity in Africa will depend on one thing above all: willingness to speak openly, to speak honestly, and to act responsibly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret, for that presentation. I see we've gotten over a bit of time to spend more time, but if we can be allowed to take at least 5 minutes to address the few questions that have come in the chat box, I'll read the two that are there, if that's okay. So your description and presentation have been very interesting, Doctor. I wanted to ask, does the acceptance of the use of nuclear energy as a tool for African society and nations also imply support for oversight, protection, and security legislation? And then there are two questions in this. Do researchers maintain discussions on the issues with their leaders regarding the creation of these laws? Wow, there are actually 3 questions in this. Would you like to take up the first question first?
Yeah, I'd like to just read it again. Just read one at a time. I'll do it very fast because I know I've used a lot of time.
Okay.
About
Yes,
that.
please. Yes, please. Yes, please. So the question is, does the acceptance of the use of nuclear energy as a tool for African society and nations also imply support for oversight, protection, and security legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, radiation protection and nuclear safety and security, those are the foundations of nuclear power. Without them, there is no way you can have nuclear power without that. They go hand in hand. Regulations have to be in place.
All right, thank you. I hope the question has been answered. The other question Maria had was, do researchers maintain discussion on these issues with their leaders regarding the creation of these laws?
Researchers and laws, researchers, especially university researchers, for the most part, they do research to gain papers, to get their PhDs and masters, but that is something we need to change. And I think it's changing, especially after what happened in Siaya, because scholars were involved, and probably that's why nuclear power was accepted there. At the coastal region, I did not hear about scholars and researchers being involved, and probably that's why nuclear power was rejected. So I hope researchers and scholars will keep being involved in decision making regarding some of these areas that are likely to affect people.
All right, for the interest of time, I'd like to take a question from Colette, and then I encourage Dr. Margaret, you could answer the rest of the question offline through, of course, the organizers. So Colette was asking, what is the scope of protective measures in local, in national, and in global?
Scope of protective measures locally, internationally, globally. For starters, nationally, there has to be national laws. You know, there has been that assumption that nuclear is supposed to be regulated by outsiders, which is not the case. Nationally, there has to be national law first. You put those in place, and then you work in collaboration with the international agencies, for example, the IAEA and AFCON. A country cannot work in isolation. You get your laws first, but also you work closely with regional and international bodies like IAEA and AFCON. AFCON is regional, IAEA is international.
Thank you so much for that answer. I don't know whether you partly answered this next question from Aisha. She asked how to manage radioactive waste effectively. If you could maybe take a shortest time, we have like 1 minute, then you can take up one more question.
How to manage radioactive waste effectively. When it comes to nuclear power, radioactive waste is usually categorized. There is that part of I don't know what to call it, waste, which can be reused. There is that part that is very active that cannot be reused. So it can be stored in caskets that do not allow radiation to seep out, or in deep geological, or in deep, let me just call them holes that are very deep. That waste can be deposited there, and it can last for thousands of years. So it has to be stored in such a way that radioactive elements, they don't contaminate the environment. They don't get to the people. I don't know if that answers the question.
Sorry for interrupting. Just as a slightly change in the schedule. Margaret, do you find it well, and Purity, if we could hold a little bit Margaret's questions for the last session, and we give the floor to Mrs. Valeria because she has to take a train in an hour. So maybe we do the compression of both lectures for Mrs. Valeria, and then we have a session for Q&A of her, and then we can return to Margaret's questions. Is that okay for you, Margaret?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Purity. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. We had like 2 more questions, so I agree. We will take up the questions after the presentation. That's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret, for the insightful presentation. Over to you, Dr. Lassina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret. Thank you for all. Now we have the second speaker. Before Before we have to present Ya Amina Opiri Apia. When I see Apia, I remember the football saucer, the best football saucer captain of Black Star, Apia. Yeah, thanks so much to be with us. I'm going to present you for our audience. Ya Alnina Apia Opiri. She is a student in Pennsylvania University, USA, and former research assistant at Nuclear Regulatory Authority, Ghana. Ya Amina Opere Apia is a PhD student in material science and engineering at Penn State University with a strong research focus on nuclear materials and waste immobilization. She previously served as an assistant research officer in nuclear material accounting at Ghana's Nuclear Regulatory Authority and hold advanced degree from North Beijing University of Chemical Technology NVA PGIC program in radiation protection. At 2023, Schlumberger Faculty for the Future Fellow and Vice President of WiNI Penn State, Ya is deeply committed to equity, education, and nuclear non-proliferation. She actively mentors emerging women in STEM and leads community outreach efforts to promote nuclear literacy among underrepresented youth. Her work bridges technical innovation with advocacy, aiming to shape a more inclusive and globally connected nuclear future. Ya also currently serves as the vice president of WiNI Penn State, as well as the network chair of Penn State chapter of the Institute of Nuclear Material Management. Thank you so much. After you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's afternoon here, so good afternoon. And wherever you are, good evening, good morning. It's nice to meet you again. Today, I have the greatest honor to introduce to you Valeria Starovoitova, PhD. She's a doctor, so you should address her as such. Valeria has over 20 years of experience in applied nuclear physics. So you know that she's not just talking out of theory, she has the experience to back her words. For over a decade, she has worked at academia, Purdue University and Idaho State University in the USA, and she has been involved in several projects such as the feasibility of photonuclear, production of isotopes, nuclear waste transmutation, and photon activation analysis. Wow, I'm impressed. In 2013, she joined NeoWave Incorporated, a private company that delivers and commissions superconducting electron accelerators. Valeria's task was to establish and lead the Applied Physics Group, which by 2018 grew to 10 researchers, including nuclear physicists and engineers, radiochemists, health physicists, and material scientists. From 2018 till 2025, Dr. Stravoitova worked at IAEA as an expert on radiation technologies. Currently, she is an independent consultant on applied nuclear physics projects. Please join me to welcome Dr. Valeria. Valeria, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Anima. It's a pleasure, and thank you for your kind introduction. Indeed, I have a lot of experience, and I just left IAEA literally this week. Monday was my last day, so I'm still trying to get the feeling of what does it mean to be free, to have flexibility to do whatever I want now. In fact, right now I'm not that far from you. I'm also in the US. I'm in the upstate New York visiting my kids, but I'm flying back to Vienna later this weekend, so I need to take a train. I appreciate I appreciate an opportunity and thank you very much for inviting me to join this wonderful school. I will do my best to try to talk about two topics which are very related to each other, even though a little bit different. So let me, I hope you can see my slides now. Do you? Okay,
Please.
super. So first I'm going to talk about industrial applications of radiation technology. And as was mentioned, I've worked for several years for a private company when we did employ electron accelerators for various applications, electron accelerators, but also some high activity sources. And then during my tenure at the IAEA, I was also investigating work of different accelerators, different high activity sources, compared them, and I talk more about it in the second lecture. But here I would like to just talk in general about how can we use radiation technology. We had an excellent lecture just now talking about nuclear power, a lecture from Dr. Margaret Change. Now I'm going to focus on non-power applications. What else can we use radiation technology for? And radiation has these amazing properties which allow us to use it for amazingly such a huge number of applications that's actually mind-blowing when you start thinking about it. First of all, as we know very well, even though we cannot see it, we cannot touch it, we cannot hear it or smell it, but we can detect it if we have certain detectors, and it's relatively easy to detect it, and it can provide very important information wherever it's present. And that leads to some applications such as tracers, which I'm going to talk about next. Additionally, as radiation delivers energy, it can modify materials. It can modify polymers. It can modify different alloys, different, basically any matter it goes through. As we know very well, radiation damages DNA and RNA, and thus it can kill or damage different germs and bacteria and viruses and cancer cells, and that leads to enormous amount of applications in food industry, in healthcare industry, and in human health. It can also break down chemicals, which opens a huge window of environmental applications. And finally, since as it passes through matter, it attenuates, it can provide information about the material it passes through and can tell you kind of what is inside a black box. So let's look at each of these 5 properties separately and see how does it allow us to use it for different industrial processes. So I mentioned that radiation is relatively easy to detect, and that property is used very often when we use radiation as a tracer. And here you see a simple cartoon showing how radiation can provide information about leakage. So let's assume you have a pipe, and this pipe contains, for example, water. It doesn't matter really what the liquid is. If there is a rupture in this pipe, if there is a leak, and then whatever you're trying to deliver is leaking, how can you find it? Of course, you can dig all along the pipe and try to find it mechanically or visually. However, it would take a lot of time, and it would be very time consuming and very expensive. What you can do instead, if the pipe is not too deep, you can basically just have your detector on the surface and move it along the pipe. If you put a tracer in your pipe, so that right now the pipe is carrying radioactive material, you will see a certain amount of radiation on the surface, and you will be able to see this amount. But once you reach the region where your leak is, then you will see an elevated rate, and that immediately tells you that this is where the leak is. And the elevated rate would be because now there is a lot of radioactive material here. So once you know where the leak is, now you can dig only this particular portion, and you can repair your pipe, and it's going to be pretty fast and not that expensive. So this is just one simple example, but basically tracers, radioactive tracers, which you can put into liquids, or sometimes not necessarily liquids. It can be gases, it can be powders, but basically they allow you to trace the movement of materials, and you can see some leaks, you can see some blockages, you can see some wear, and that helps you to optimize your industrial process and become more efficient. It's used very often in oil and gas industry. It also used very often in chemical and process engineering to see what is the efficiency in your chemical reactors. And of course, it's used a lot in metallurgy and mechanical engineering to see how quickly your parts of your equipment wear out. This is another example for a slightly different setup, but the idea is still the same. So let's assume that you have some kind of leak in your pipe. Actually, I have two leaks here shown in red. And then what you're going to do, you're going to have like a push and you're gonna have a detector which is going to record the activity, and you have several sources here, and now you're gonna have a signal which again tells you where the leak is, which is an amazing property which allows us to save a lot of money and a lot of effort and optimize the finding the leaks, finding the broken pipes, etc., etc. I mentioned the wear studies a little bit, and here is another simple cartoon showing you how you can figure out if your rings are worn or not. So this is a engine, a car engine, or basically it can be any engine. And if you want to know how much wearing is happening, what you can do is you can irradiate these rings, and then as the oil goes through the system, it picks up. So these red dots are kind of showing you where the radioactive parts of your rings, and you can see how much wearing is happening over time. If it's an efficient process or it's not very efficient, basically once you have a detector that allows you to say if your engine is good or you need to replace some pistons and rods or some bearings, something else. But you can do that pretty efficiently, and you can do that to study how well your engine designed and how old this particular engine is. I said that radiation modifies materials, and actually it's true because once you radiate the material, you have some atomic displacement. The radiation knocks atoms from the lattice, and it results in some defects and vacancies. Radiation also ionizes the material, so it breaks chemical bonds and it forms new species. And what kind of effects it has? In fact, it changes effects significantly. So for example, if you have a particular polymer and you radiate it, you can change its mechanical strength, you can change its melting temperature, you can change its Young modulus. A lot of properties of different materials can change, and materials, even though visually they don't change much, they can have very different properties. Of course, it results in a lot of changes, specifically in polymers. They cross-link. That's what we call cross-linking, when you break some bonds and you form new bonds. And sometimes you do change the optical properties. Let me give you some examples. The first one is radiation-induced cross-linking. So here you can see the tires. I assume a lot of you maybe have a car, maybe you take a taxi, whatever. But next time you take a ride in a bus, in a car, whatever, note that the tires in this car most likely have been irradiated, because historically vulcanization of rubber has been done chemically. However, right now majority of the processes are done using radiation. So what happens is, before irradiation you see this kind of black waves that I tried to show, and these are your polymer chains initially. If you ever seen the rubber, the natural rubber coming from the trees, it's a white milky substance which looks white, which is very liquidy and sticky and has very unique properties. However, after you irradiate it with E-beam, for example, you achieve so-called cross-linking. So you can see these purple lines now, which represent new bonds formed between your polymer chains. And the more you irradiate, the more bonds are formed. So your rubber changes color, it changes properties, it becomes dark, it becomes very elastic, it becomes pretty hard. And the tires you can see right now are actually, once they irradiated, we say vulcanized, which means that they change their properties, they become less sticky and have excellent properties suitable for the car. Another example you see on the right is a cable. Again, any cable you see around your house, or in your car again, most likely has been irradiated. This horizontal structure, kind of shower head that you see above the cables, this is actually an electron beam irradiating the cables and changing their properties to make sure that their melting temperature decreases and increases. And right now, even if there is a fire, let's say in your house or in your car, but these polymers are not going to get destroyed, they're not going to pick up the fire, and they actually are much more efficient. Finally, I said that sometimes radiation changes optical properties, and another very common example is irradiation of gemstones, which is very common in many countries in Asia, in India specifically, or in South America. In Brazil, there are a lot of facilities which irradiate gemstones. What happens is when you irradiate a gemstone, what happens is you form some optical centers which change the colors. And once you change the color of your topaz or diamond or ruby, then they change, they become very colorful, and it increases their price. So a lot of industries, what they do, they produce some gemstones and then they irradiate it to increase the cost of the gemstones, and that's a pretty interesting industry as well. I also said that radiation has some significant biological effects, and this is something unfortunately many of us are familiar with. It's hard nowadays to find a person who doesn't have a relative, for example, who had cancer, and many of these people had radiation therapy. We all have heard about the horrible effects of Chernobyl and etc. when people received radiation poisoning from absorbing too much radiation, which affected their DNA. However, damaging DNA can be a very good thing, and there are a lot of industrial uses when we use radiation to, let's say, kill cancer cells. Actually, it's more medical, which I'm not talking about here. However, it could be a separate lecture by itself. However, radiation is often used to, let's say, sterilize some medical products. Every time you go to a doctor and get a vaccine, for example, and they put out syringe out of this wrapper, and the syringe, in fact, most likely has been irradiated. The gloves the doctors put on their hands, the gowns that they're wearing, a lot of instruments, especially instruments which contain some polymer materials, because okay, if that's just metal, you can sterilize it by high temperature, but if this is a polymer, you cannot really heat it up, so you have to sterilize it by radiation. So majority of medical instruments, majority of pharmaceuticals, such as pills you take, is irradiated to kill the bacteria, to kill the viruses, and to make sure that whatever procedures a patient undergoes are safe. Food industry. This is a little bit controversial issue, and I know it differs from country to country because different countries have different rules and regulations. But in many countries, a significant amount of food is irradiated. Meat is often irradiated, spices are irradiated almost everywhere. A lot of fruits, a lot of fish, a lot of seafood, etc., etc. So the advantages of this approach is that it's not thermal. Once you irradiate your materials, whatever they are, medical products, drugs, or food, they are not getting heated, so it doesn't really change their properties. And also another advantage, it penetrates packaging. So for example, You can package your syringes. You don't need to open them up. You can have a whole box. You can put it under e-beam or cobalt 60, and then they got irradiated. You don't have to repackage them. So this is just an image showing how some medical devices are being sterilized. So typically they receive 10 kilogray to 20 kilogray dose. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just medical devices, but it's tissues that a lot of patients have to receive. Drugs, vaccines, a lot of cosmetics that people are using is also sterilized using radiation. Food, I talked about food already. We use different doses depending on the application. Sometimes if you're just talking about, let's say, storing some potatoes or rice, then you deliver them relatively low dose because you want to slow the ripening or kill some parasites or insects, or inhibit sprouting. If you are talking about fruits or meat or seafood, then you try to deliver high dose. It's pretty common in Asia. Okay, some countries in China specifically. In the US, there is a lot of sterilization of food and meat and fruits, etc. Not that common in Europe, but again, as I said, it depends country to country. Finally, there are some special cases. There is some special food which is highly irradiated with very high doses to make sure that it's sterile. An example is a hospital food for some immunocompromised patients, for example, with serious cancer. It's also true for space food. If you ever thought what astronauts eat in space, and you've seen these interesting tubes and the food they eat from it, believe me, it's sterilized. And we've worked a lot with groups which produce this food, because the last thing you want astronauts to have on the orbit is a food poisoning. So they make sure that no bacteria, no viruses, nothing like that gets on the space. I said radiation breaks down chemicals. In the same way, radiation breaks down DNA molecule. It can break basically um, um, the bonds between atoms in the DNA. In the same way, it can break bonds between atoms in different compounds. And this is used quite extensively in a lot of environmental applications. So for example, if you want to treat flue gas, gas exhaust from boats, from factories, from power plants, and destroy some SO2, CO2, and some volatile organic chemicals. This is happening sometimes with irradiation. Of course, it can be done chemically. However, it has their own drawbacks. Industrial water treatment is done in many countries using radiation. When you have very dirty water, again, you can try to decontaminate it with chemicals, but there is also a way to do it with radiation, to break down some complex chemicals into simpler ones which are less dangerous. And finally, it can be also used to remove biohazards from sludge and wastewater. Margaret was talking about raising population and growing cities, and all these growing cities have growing amount of sludge, growing amount of wastewater, which needs to be dealt with somehow. And very often these big cities end up with huge, basically, garbage sites, and it is a problem. And one thing to do is to reuse the sludge, to reuse the wastewater, and maybe produce some fertilizers out of it. However, you need to make sure that there are no biohazards there, there are no parasites, there are no viruses, there are no bacteria, and radiation can be a very efficient tool for that. The last application I would like to mention very quickly is non-destructive testing. Radiation penetrates through matter and can tell us kind of what is inside without opening what is inside. And we know it's used a lot in healthcare. I'm sure all of you have had some kind of x-ray, maybe at your dentist, or maybe you had your hand broken or something like that. So you can easily see through your body and see how your bones are doing. It shows you if there are any cracks. It shows you if there are any cavities in your teeth. In the same way, it can be used to show if there are any cracks or any issues in metal. So here you can see a person doing non-destructive testing of a pipe, again to see that, okay, right now there is no leak, there is no crack, but maybe it's building. So you want to make sure that you can prevent it. Periodically there is testing of airplanes, railroads, bridges, etc., etc. So non-destructive testing is happening everywhere, and it's happening routinely. So again, every time you take a plane, every time you take a train, go through a bridge, you can think about that maybe there was some radiation used there as well. Nucleonic control systems. This is a very common tool to use radiation as a monitor, for example, for thickness. So let's say you're producing aluminum foil and you want to make sure that the thickness of this aluminum foil is consistent and it remains at certain number, for example, I don't know, 50 micrometers. What you do for that is you basically set up your radiation source on one side, let's say on top of the foil, as shown here, and your detector at the bottom. If the thickness is what it's supposed to be, then your detector shows you a certain value. If the thickness is smaller, then the penetration is higher and you have a higher signal. If the thickness is higher, then you have a smaller signal. So very easily you can control the thickness of the material you produce. In this similar way, you can control the density, you can control the moisture, you can control your filling level. You can also look at the component analysis in different products in cement and coal industry. And in general, you can control a lot of processes. So in conclusion, I just wanted to tell you that even though this short presentation was focused on industrial applications, and I didn't even touch the medical, I didn't touch very much cultural heritage or environmental, but basically radiation technologies are all around us. We don't pay attention too much to it. We don't maybe think too much about it, but literally it's everywhere. During your regular day, you touch the objects, you touch the products that have been treated with radiation routinely. And I encourage you to just think about how awesome it is and acknowledge the amazing properties of radiation, which allow us to use it in so many different industries for so many different applications. And I want to emphasize one more time that radiation technology, it offers us so many cost savings across so many sectors, which I just mentioned briefly because we didn't have much time. But I would be happy to talk more to any of you about this. And I hope that this short presentation uh, made you appreciate radiation much more. And and um, and I'll be happy to answer all questions. And thank you.
Anybody have questions? Do you want to put your questions in the chat? So I can, let me wear my glasses. So I can read it out. So Valeria, if you are in too much of a hurry, you can let us know so that we put the chat there and then you can answer them later so that we can share it with everyone else after.
Yeah, basically, as you wish. I can go ahead right now with the second presentation,
Okay.
and then I can maybe have some time to answer a few minutes to answer some questions. Is that okay with everyone?
Oh, I have one hand raised by Fiorella. Okay, maybe Fiorella will take your question and then that's it. We'll go to the next presentation. Please ask your question.
You can unmute
Yeah.
yourself, Pirella.
Yeah. Please ask. You're not answering, so let's go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. Let me just then go ahead and talk about high activity sources and accelerators, pros and cons, and then I would be happy to answer questions. So I shared with you some various applications of radiation technologies, and as you probably noticed, sometimes I was talking about electron beam, and sometimes I was talking about cobalt-60 or some other high activity sources. And what I would like to talk about right now is kind of distinguish between each of them and talk about pros and cons of using activity sources versus electron machines. When we talk about activity sources, high activity sources, typically for industrial applications, or medical as well, we are talking about cesium and cobalt. And cesium and cobalt both have pretty convenient properties. They have relatively long half-life. Cobalt has 5 years, cesium 30 years, and they have a rather high energy of the gamma radiation. So you see the decay schemes here, 660 keV for cesium, over 1 MeV for cobalt. Due to these properties, they're commonly used in medical applications. They're used for radiotherapy, they're used for irradiation of blood for transfusion, they're used in tissue banking. They're also used in food industry. As I mentioned earlier, they're commonly both cesium and cobalt are commonly used for sterilization of insects and also for food irradiation. And of course, cobalt-60 is commonly used for sterilization of medical devices, for cross-linking of materials, for non-destructive testing, and finally for research. Excellent material, relatively easy to produce in the reactor, relatively abundant. Why do we want to change something? Why do you want to say, okay, maybe we don't want to use cobalt? Sources, in fact, can be dangerous, and it can be both accidental and on purpose. And I just would like to give you some examples. And again, Margaret mentioned some cases and some accidents that happened in the past. Here are the ones which are not as well known. So, for example, in 2010, there was an attempt to use to recover some scrap metal from the old radiotherapy source, and the man died after handling it, and it contained some cobalt-60. In 2013, a truck was lost in Mexico as it was transporting a old cobalt-60 source, disused cobalt-60 source from a hospital to a waste storage facility, and the truck was hijacked during a stop when the driver was not in the truck, and the thieves, the truck was found later, and thieves, no one died, thank God, but they could have received a fatal dose of radiation. They did get hurt. In 1993, in Russia, a cesium source was hidden in an office chair that you can see here. It was an attempt to kill the CEO of the company. So we can see that the sources sometimes they can be misused, and they can be dangerous. The advantage of the particle accelerator, which can be used for a lot of applications, is that it cannot be disused like that. So typically when you talk about an electron beam, you use it either directly when you have just electrons, and it's commonly used for relatively thin materials or low density materials treatment. So for example, if I want to irradiate a very thin film, like cables that I showed in the previous presentation. Or sometimes you can produce X-rays from the electron beam using a converter from electrons to X-rays. In this case, you have much higher power, much higher penetration, but you have much less power because you have some losses when you're converting electrons to photons. So if you try to compare them and kind of put them side by side, you would say that cobalt-60, and yes, of course, you can say cesium as well. These irradiators are relatively common, are relatively simple. You basically have your material and it irradiates non-stop until it decays. It's a proven technology. However, because it does decay, it needs to be replaced because its activity is dropping all the time. Another issue with cobalt specifically, but it's true for any other radioisotopes, is that the cost increases. We have a lot of, when I was working at the IAEA, we had a lot of companies who asked us to replace their sources. And if, let's say, they were able to buy them 5 years ago at about $3 per curie, right now the price doubled pretty much, if not more. And waste disposal is an issue. So once you use your cobalt source, what are you going to do with them? You're going to have to deliver them to a special facility and to where they're stored safely, etc., etc. Electron accelerator, on the other hand, it's just a machine with a button. You turn it on, you turn it off. When you're not using it, it's not producing radiation. You cannot really steal it. I mean, yeah, you can steal it, but it's kind of ridiculous because it's a big machine which is not working unless you provide all the power, cooling, etc., etc. And the disadvantage is that it requires some power supply, and it does require some highly skilled operators and people to make it running. Here are some examples of some cases that I would like to share with you. And one of the cases I wanted to talk about is the cesium blood irradiator. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of blood needs to be irradiated, especially when you're transfusing blood to immunocompromised patients. So thousands of cesium blood irradiators are installed worldwide. And these are just simple machines where you put the blood bag. If you ever donated blood, you know what I'm talking about. So you have this pouch, this plastic bag with the blood, which they place into machine, irradiate it for a very short amount of time, and remove it from there. These companies, these hospitals are motivated to change to accelerators using X-ray tubes, and a lot of countries have their own financial and regulatory incentives. So, for example, in the US, there is a whole project where companies are being paid to replace their cesium with accelerator facilities. And there are a lot of machines from different vendors that are able to replace them. I'm not going to go over the parameters in the table, but if you're interested, you can take a look at what is the typical requirement and what are the typical machines to replace the cesium sources. But I can tell you that there are a variety of machines which are already doing it. So at least for this particular application, we can say that we don't really need cesium. We can really produce radiation by accelerators. Cobalt research irradiators is another example that I would like to go over quickly. This is a typical gamma cell which contains produced by Nordion in Canada, and it contains some cobalt-60, typically tens to hundreds kilocuries, and there are hundreds of these cells all over the world. And you can replace these small irradiators with the 4 MeV electron accelerators. And again, there are some parameters here in the table. Sometimes you see some larger cobalt facilities which have more than just this unit, and they have a bunker, they have a source pool sometimes, or a source rack, and even these facilities can be replaced with accelerators, and they can be used for different applications in research and industry. Sometimes we're talking about like huge facilities like cobalt industrial irradiators that had megacuries of cobalt, hundreds megacuries of cobalt used for sterilization of medical devices. You can see this Cherenkov radiation glowing from the ray of cobalt sources in the pool. This can also be replaced with irradiators, and a lot of companies are using irradiators, accelerator irradiators nowadays, and trying to switch from cobalt to electron beam, or maybe not completely switch, but complement their cobalt facility with e-beam facility. And again, this is some data for your perusal if you want to see later what is required to replace 1 megacurie or 5 megacurie source. And I can tell you that all these solutions are available. So when we have a newcomer in the industry and they say, okay, I want to use some kind of radiation facility, What should I use? Should I go with cobalt or should I go with the accelerator? Here are a lot of questions which you need to answer before you make a decision. You need to understand very well what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages of high activity sources and accelerators. Would these two tools provide similar results or comparable results at least? Also, how reliable is the alternative technology? Because accelerators, that sounds great, but what do you do when it's broken? Do you know how to fix it? Do you know where to get help? Do you know how much it's going to cost you? And actually, speaking of costs, that's at the end what everything goes to. You need to consider capital cost. How much would it cost to buy an accelerator versus buy the source? What would be your operational expenses? For accelerators, it's much higher in terms of power, electric power, and water. What would be your licensing and regulation costs? For a cobalt, it would be much higher. For accelerators, not as much. Security issues and safety, personnel and training, and finally disposal. So a lot of questions that need to be answered. Very often we at the IE had facilities in different countries who would come to us and say, okay, we've had this gamma facility for many years, but now we decided to switch to accelerator. How can we do this transition? And then there are a lot of challenges that you need to tackle, and these challenges are both technical, shown here. It is indeed, accelerators are less reliable than sources because they're more complicated. The dose distribution is different. The effects on products sometimes are different, and facility conversions sometimes are different. If you have a cobalt facility, even your shielding might not be enough for accelerator, or maybe your space is not big enough to put your accelerator with everything. Your regulatory challenges are also there for the transition. If you have a license to operate a Cobalt 60 source, that doesn't mean that it would be easy to get a license to operate an accelerator. And again, it depends on the country, but in many countries it can take years to get an approval for a new food or a new process or a new product. And historically, gamma sterilization has been more common because it's easier, but now e-beam and especially X-ray are taking over. However, they are not well described in regulatory manuals, and a lot of regulators, they just don't know what to do. How do I license it? How do I approve it? So this is pretty complicated. And finally, again, as I said, this is economical challenges. I mentioned already the rising cost of cobalt 60, which almost tripled in the last 30 years from 1 USD to 2 USD and 5 USD. Actually, it's more than 5 now. Sorry, this is a relatively old slide. It's more like $8 US right now. Regulations and logistics is very tricky. And conversion can be very tricky. So you need to have a very thorough financial analysis. And I can say that for some cases, we were able to show that yes, it would be better if a particular country in a particular facility in a particular country would convert. And in some cases, the answer was no. Maybe for now, it's better to stick to the original solution. I would like to conclude to say that both sources and accelerators are amazing technologies. I'm not here to preach for accelerators and say cobalt is bad, accelerators are good. No, but I would like to emphasize that there are differences between two techniques. Very often they can be replaced. Sometimes they cannot. But whatever decision is made, it needs to be based on very careful analysis, which includes both technical part, regulatory part, economical part, and it is not an easy exercise, but it's absolutely necessary for anyone who is diving into the business. And a lot of industrial groups are working with both types of sources, machine and activity sources, and IEA has been working a lot to help different countries to make a decision. I think that's all I wanted to say, and I'm happy to take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria. It was such an insightful session. We are waiting for questions. Fiorella, let me see whether she's posted her question. Oh, she did. So her question is, how is nuclear energy revolutionizing industrial processes such as water desalination or green hydrogen production? And what technical challenges does its large-scale implementation present?
Thank you. This is an excellent question. So this is more a question of nuclear energy, and indeed, we know that water desalination is a big project in many countries which are lacking clean water. There are projects on that, and it requires a lot of energy. Specifically, for example, the power plants in United Arab Emirates, the Baraka power plant is. Also desalinating water, as far as I know. So there are desalinating facilities there. I think here the point is a little bit different because the desalination facility itself does not really use radiation technology. However, it uses energy coming from nuclear power plant. It's using energy coming from radiation or nuclear technology. But the process itself of desalination does not really require any radiation. So this process could be taken with energy coming from another source, and same for hydrogen production. However, those are related. Yes.
Thank you so much, Valeria. I do not see any more questions here at the moment, so I'm gonna let you go.
Sorry
Oh.
for interrupting you. We have in the Q&A,
Okay.
some questions are waiting on the line. We have something from Fatma.
Oh.
Maybe can you see those?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you.
Fatma wants to know, how can we bridge the gap between the benefits of radiation technologies and the public perception of risk? And what kind of regulatory frameworks are necessary to achieve this? Dr. Valeria, did you hear that?
I thought it's a question for Fatma, no? Oh, sorry.
Fatma is the one asking.
Okay. How can we bridge the gap between the benefits of radiation technologies and public perception of risk? Thank you very much. This is an excellent question, and we hear it very often, especially when we are talking about food irradiation, because as I mentioned, in different countries, this is a very big issue. So, for example, in Europe, where I live now, almost no food is irradiated. Spices are the only exception. In the US, where I am now, almost everything is irradiated. Meat is irradiated, fruits are irradiated, lettuce is irradiated. And I guess the public perception is something which is very difficult to change. And the only way I see doing that is starting basically going in small steps. There is no revolutionary approach there. There is only evolutionary approach. I can give you an example. When I was living in Michigan, I was living in a city called Lansing, and we had a big facility there. Radiation facility, and almost all the kids from all the schools, as they were kids, they were going there for a visit. They were going there for the tour. And as you bring kids at a young age, and they understand that, okay, here is an accelerator, here are some activity sources, this is not something dangerous, this is not something people um, mutate from immediately just looking at that. Of course, you need to know what you're doing. Of course, you need to do your precautions. But familiarizing yourself from the very young age, in my opinion, is one of the best thing you can do. So from my side, I went to my kids' school when they were little, and I would try to talk about radiation to every year, to every classroom, and just say, okay, here are the good things. Yes, here are the drawbacks. But you need to know what you're doing. You need to know what you're dealing with. If you're not familiar, if something is you don't know, that's scary. But if you understand what's going on, this is what makes you powerful. So my kind of pledge to you is, please Spread the word. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids' classmates. Talk to everyone you know, and try to spread the word about benefits of radiation, so that people become less scared of that and understand it better. And radiation technologies come closer and closer to our life and helping us and improving everyone's well-being.
All right. Thank you so much for a question well answered. I'm going to pass the baton on to Purity Maria because she was.
Thank you. If you please
yeah.
excuse me, I will leave you as I need to take a train. Oh, there was one more question which I will answer very quickly about irradiation of gemstones. Gemstones are just put in a nuclear reactor. So that's the easiest way, majority of them, because they need very high dose. And if you want to irradiate it with the accelerators or high activity sources, it's going to take a long time. But typically neutron irradiation is done. Again, thank you, everyone. And if anyone has any further questions, I would be happy to answer them. My email is probably shared, and I would be happy to get back to you. All the best, and looking forward to participate in such events again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much for everything, and we wish you to have a very safe flight also back home to Vienna. Okay, over to you, Purity, and yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I don't know whether we can take up the questions for Dr. Margaret, or yeah, I would like to finish off. Then we can proceed to Dr. Margaret.
For my part, I think Dr. Valeria is hard pressed for time, so she'll answer the questions later. So I'd like you to take over the questions for Dr. Margaret, if it's not a bother. Purity?
Yes, and not muted. I was saying it's okay, it's fine. Dr. Margaret, is that okay with you? We can take the two questions. We had two questions that were not answered, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's fine with me. I've tried to answer some online.
Okay, yeah, I can see that you've already answered most of the questions, but there's one that was not answered from Frederick. Would you like to take that up? It says, thank you, Doctor, for the rich presentation. I'm among those with mistrust in nuclear power plants, especially in operations in Africa, rightfully due to failing systems that are in place. I would like to hear your opinion regarding Kenya, readiness on waste transport, handling, and transportation, especially given Kenya's nuclear waste storage is miles away from the proposed site. Maybe you could take that a quick one.
Yeah, thank you.
Give
Thank
a
you,
context
Purity.
from African perspective as well.
From African perspective, I think the problem we have in Africa is communication. People don't get all the information they require. For example, whatever nuclear facility we have in, I think it's in Narok or Kajiado, that will not be used for, I don't think it will be used for nuclear waste generated from nuclear plants. In fact, nuclear waste from nuclear plants is usually stored on site. It is usually stored on site, and some of it is reprocessed. The spent fuel, the irradiated fuel, that one can be reprocessed and reused as fuel, and that reduces waste. So I think as Africa, we really need to invest in communication, because when people are informed, they have all the facts, the risks, how you handle the risk, the protection measures that are in place, then they'll start embracing nuclear power. And transport, again, transport, you don't just put radioactive material in a lorry and take it from one point to another. It has to be packaged in a special way. And this is the information that is not out there. People don't know that, and they need to be told that, so that they can trust the process. Thank you. I hope I've answered the question.
I believe you have. Maybe if Frederick has more questions, he can reach out to either yourself or myself or anyone here for further maybe information. Unless there are any more questions, I think we are done from our end.
I believe we are done too.
All right, it's been a pleasure. If there are other questions, I'll be happy to answer them offline, email or WhatsApp for Kenyans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can collect those questions and send them over to you, Margaret, through email or WhatsApp, and then that'll be fine. I think you are also part of the group community we set up, but in case not, I'll add you, and if other people would like to have some offline discussion from this room, they can have it with you if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you so much. So we really thank all the brilliant moderators and speakers we have for today's session, and we acknowledge their professional experience and great knowledge they've been transferring to us today. And we want to say a big thank you for all your active participation today. We have a very, very active discussion, and the insights shared above once again shown the deep and the diversity of nuclear applications and the importance of collaboration across disciplines and borders. So as we move forward, let's keep the momentum going. Let's continue to demystify nuclear science and making it possible, practical, and empowering for all. So we look forward to seeing you next Monday for another day of learning and inspiration. Until then, stay curious and stay connected. So now I would like to hand over to my colleague Lancina for final remarks. Thank you, Lancina. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Florentina, for the floor you give me. I will be short and sweet because we take your time. We have no time to waste because I know it is very, very precious for you. Thank you so much for your dedication. Thank you so much to be with us, to teach, to learn, and to let know the future of nuclear in the world. Thank you so much. Next Monday, it will be the second week of summer school. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon where you are.
Bye,
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Blessings to everyone. Have a very good weekend. Stay blessed and safe.
Bye. Thank you. Have a great evening and afternoon.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks to you. All of you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.